Hi, welcome to this month's version of the Founders Fireside at Ray, Eugene, Oregon. This month that's actually not Founders Fireside, it's First Employee Fireside. And this month we have Kat McCormick, who was the first employee at NemaMetrix. And I will let Kat explain what NemaMetrix does.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm Kat McCormick. I'm the Director of Research at NemaMetrix, and I joined the company in 2014. I think it was, it was January of 2014 when I first started interacting with the founders. And then my actual involvement with the company started before that because I was a graduate student with the founder of the company inside of U of O. And I can actually remember when I was a graduate student sitting around the lab talking about what should we name this company. And we came up with NemaMetrix and argued about whether it should be spelled with a CS or an X. Anyway, what we do is we engineer worms, nematodes, and we can put genes into them, we can take genes out of them, and we can also see how their behavior changes when we do that. So the best application of our, most exciting application, I think, of our technology has been to put human genes into the worm in place of the worm version of that gene. And since the worms are conserved with human biology, as the tree of life has gotten all of its branches, we can put in the human gene and it still works there. So we do that, and then we can look at human variants of the gene. So you might have a different version of a particular protein than I do, and we can put in your version and create a Shane worm, and my version and create a cat worm, and we can see how they behave differently. So
what are the applications of that?
Oh, well, so, yeah.
Why do it?
Why do it? Well, it's mostly for disease. So in cases where there's a strong genetic component to a disease, like epilepsy is one that we've worked a lot on, there's a particular gene that codes a ion channel, which helps neurons work. And when we put in a diseased version of that protein, we can tell it in the worms. They don't move at all. They can no longer crawl like a worm is supposed to do. And then that ability, if we make an epileptic child's version of the worm, allows us to screen drugs so that the child's physician can know which drugs are more likely to give a good outcome for the child. Yep.
Cool. So now that we know what NemaMetrix does, as Kat alluded to, she was a graduate student, got her Ph.D. at the University of Oregon.
I did, yes.
And totally planned on going into a business right after school.
Totally planned on it. Always the plan. Yeah.
So how did you end up?
So it is interesting. I think what I started to think about as I was going through graduate school was what my career would be like if I stayed in academics, and what other careers I could envision myself having. And so I think maybe most people know that when you're a graduate student, you're trained to be a professor. That's the only thing that you're really trained to do. That's the only possibility that professors see in your future is to have a future like they do, like they currently have. So they really never teach you about
life,
startups, industry, anything else you could do with your time. So, but then when I started to think about myself as a professor, I just didn't like the possibilities that it held for me. And so I started looking for other things to do, and you have to be creative and you have to be wacky, but, so I thought about things that weren't startups, but then this company happened while I was in graduate school, and it wasn't really going. It was kind of it had a name, but it was a project. It didn't have any employees. It didn't have any momentum. And shortly after I graduated, around the time I graduated, it started gaining momentum. And so that when I did decide I was going to leave the lab, started doing something else. I was writing a book, and then finally someone called me up. The CEO of the company called me up and said, we really need an employee here. We need somebody to come do this. to work at this company who knows about worms, which I did. So that's how I ended up there.
So, sort of going from the academic environment and going to sort of employee number one, or 0.5 even, right?
Right.
Because you were so early there. What's turned out as you thought it would?
Oh, as I thought it would? So I really didn't have any expectations. And when I joined, I knew that the people who founded this company would continue to be really strongly involved and passionate about the project, and they have been. So that, I guess that did turn out as I thought it would. I also thought it would be. Can I go on the other side?
Yeah.
Okay. What didn't turn out?
I was
going to
ask you that next anyway. So.
Okay. Good. I thought it would be. I thought it would be kind of like quicker, in some ways. And I didn't.
Quicker to what?
To exit, to like when my involvement would come to its end.
Okay.
But I found that as the company's grown, and now we're at 53 employees, my role has grown too, and I've grown, and I can see a future there for myself.
So it was in 2014?
2014,
so
yeah.
Sort of officially, you've been doing this longer than you did your graduate work.
Real
close.
Real close, yeah.
You know?
We won't go into the specifics.
Do you think the level of learning has been sort of the same?
Oh, no. Yeah, I mean, it's been a lot. Huger. Way more learning. Yeah, way more growth. And I think part of that is just the startup-ness of it, but it's also the kind of phase of life I'm in. My whole life has expanded in this time.
Okay.
So, yeah, just learned. I mean, obviously, academically, not as much during this 5 years, but just more about myself and what the possibilities are and the directions that this technology could grow.
So what surprised you most about yourself through this last 5 years?
I think just how much it came to feel like mine. You know, I'm not a founder, but I consider myself a late-stage founder of this company. You know, and I'm in the time that I've been there, I had one kid, and I'm pregnant again, and so I'm, you know, I was talking with the CEO the other day, and he's asking me about how I'm feeling, how's your kids, and then he's like, how about the other baby? And he means the company,
right.
You know, and I get that. Like, that's the way I feel about it. That's, you know, it might be an elementary schooler now, but it's still like a something that I consider mine, that I really have gotten to the point where it is.
So what's it like going from basically you and the founders and you to 53 people?
It's insane. There's just like, actually I was just interviewing today somebody who used to work at the company. She left 2 years ago, and now she's interviewing for a position again because it's, I don't know. So just the number of people who are there, and also the type of people that they are. I feel really privileged to have gotten to meet so many really good people. You know, they're dedicated to what they do, and for almost all of us, this is our first startup. And there's so many people there who are trying on new roles, trying on new responsibilities. And it's a really interesting thing to watch that many people come to work every day and grapple with what growth means for themselves and for the company.
So also in terms of that growth, culturally, how has the culture changed, or what is the culture now? Is it the same, or is it?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So I think my answer to that would be different a little bit from the founders' answer to that, especially our academic founders. They would probably say that it's radically different because it's so different than an academic environment is.
Sure.
And I would say that some of that, those academic qualities about thoroughness and checking all the boxes and all that kind of stuff can be really slow. So it felt like a really big culture change to go from we are doing research
Public
public research with a technology, and we really need to make it like a paper.
Right.
We have to think of this in terms of materials and methods and conclusions and results and all that kind of stuff, to actually just coming to the realization that we need to get something out there. Like something has to launch, that there has to be a product, there has to be marketing material. We have to like say something about what we're doing here.
Not just a poster at a conference.
Right, exactly. Not just a poster saying like, come back and see us in 2 years, but here, click here, you can buy this now. That kind of transition was probably the biggest one that we went through culturally. But that one happened, I think, in the first year or two that I was there. And since that time, the culture has changed kind of incrementally as different people come in and add. But what I've seen is that overall, I think the culture is set by the first few hires. And so the level of adaptability that you have as a company, your openness to dialogue, how communication happens, what you value for the customer, all of those things are really set early on, and they just kind of permeate everybody who joins after that.
So now you're a director, which means you're directing.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
How has that sort of changed you as a person, managing people, right? Because
Yeah.
you go from a graduate student, you're in a lab, and you're usually working for a PI, and then you have some direction,
Right.
some more than others. But now you went from one, and now you have people working for you. How has that changed your mindset around like who you are, and then sort of a scientist who you are too?
Yeah, I think to have people working for me, it drives me a little bit harder each day, and how I show up and the influence I want to have on them. I've become a lot more deliberate about the kind of leader that I want to be, and even just coming into the idea of being a leader and having power, having agency. I used to really see power as kind of a dirty word.
Okay.
It sounds like having power over or something like that. But now I really think of it more in terms of empowering and enabling other people to achieve what they can achieve. So so I think that's been the biggest change for me, is coming to see myself not as a manager but as a leader.
Okay.
To the people who report to me and who I'm responsible to. And then just also making sure that that there's visibility on both sides. I think communication gaps are like the biggest and hardest part of managing people. Making sure that they get the information they need in a timely way can sometimes feel like a really hard thing to do, because everybody gets busy and you're in different places.
Well, and now, you're a company with 53 people, so you don't know everybody. I mean, you know their face, but you don't know them, right?
Right.
So it's not those informal conversations of swinging by their desk.
Right.
Or, having that, have you thought about this conversation? For multiple reasons. One, you're busier, and two, they're busier, but you just don't have those informal collisions that you once did.
Right.
How do you, with those communications, we were joking before the interview about our terse emails.
Yeah.
Right? So how do you manage that informal communication where you're talking to somebody, bump to them at lunch, versus email, versus, I don't know, do you guys use Slack or whatever, or anything like that?
Yeah.
As somebody who is employee number one, who's worried about the culture and growing, how do you manage that communication? Because a lot of times in a really growing company, communication gets sloppy.
Yeah, it does. And I think communications continues to be like the number one struggle of the entire company. how to communicate within the department, up and down, and then especially how to communicate laterally to other departments. And I find that, especially for people in my department, this is just very personal, but I try to make sure that when we are seeing each other in person, that they feel, because I'm terse in my emails too, they feel a personal connection when we're together. And so it allows me some ability to be a little bit more terse in email if that good, that foundation of goodwill and intention is there. But also, one of the things that I learned really early on is how good it feels to get a well-written email. It's kind of crazy, but like when you get an email where there's the effort put in to making sure that you understand what is what's being presented to you, and that if there's any action, you know what action to take. If there's not an action, you know kind of where to put it. It feels entirely different than when you're sent an email that has an attached PDF and no subject line. That which happens. That
you open those?
Happened to me yesterday. So I try to be a little bit more intentional and mindful when I'm sending emails, but it does take effort.
Well, so because I know about NemaMetrix a little bit, and you guys are a different bird than most of the companies we have here and talk about, one of the ways you've grown is you've actually acquired companies and then had them join you. I'm not going to say absorbed. That sounds a little creepy.
Yeah.
But what are the challenges when you're in the middle of growth and then adding, 16, 20 more people who are in a remote location, most of them, into your company? How you as employee one versus a founder, what were the disconnects you saw between what you saw versus the founders?
I think that time during that merger where we were bringing together these companies, that was one of the most challenging things that we've been through. Mostly because our own culture wasn't set. We were kind of like a soft egg, and then you're adding in another soft egg, and trying to figure out how to get everything to work together. And we were really lucky in that some of the key employees from that company moved here. And that enabled us to use their influence to make sure that the other site, which still is in Salt Lake City, Utah, feels like part of the same company. But I think the hardest thing was just identifying what the difference in cultures actually was. And there were some ways in which the cultures were really similar, and so it made it harder to identify the dissimilarities and address the dissimilarities.
And did you address them head on, or did you, was this, let's have a conversation about who needs to do what, or was it just sort of this play it by ear, no plan thing?
Yeah, so a little bit of both, honestly. I think the roles and responsibilities we tried to address as head-on as we could. You are now going into this role, the reporting structure will be this. All of the employees of that company had to sign new employment contracts with us where they all had to work for a new company.
Right.
But I think what was harder to identify was more like just the softer stuff. So they had a very family feel to their company. They all ate lunch together every day and bought Costco meals and kind of made a buffet line, and it had more of like a mom and pop kind of feel to the way that they did business. Okay. And we really didn't, and it obviously wasn't possible for us to sit down with them. And so we got better at utilizing remote technologies and video conferencing and all that kind of stuff to get to know them. But I think that the real changes and strengths came from mixing up the reporting structures and having people interact in different ways, so that we didn't have everyone there reporting to the same person they had been.
So I'm not going to ask, like, what's the biggest mistake you've made? But I'm
Okay.
going to ask, what's the thing you would like to change most if you could go back?
If I could go back in time.
And don't say not work for NemaMetrix. I'm
No.
talking about after.
After I decided to join. What would I go back to change? I think that if I could whisper to my past self, I would be telling her to think bigger from the start.
Okay.
So when we started, we were more about technology, like a specific machine that we were making to do a particular thing. And what we've become is a lot bigger than that. And I think if I had known the kind of mergers that we'd go through, how much we would be implementing genetics into what we do now, and just kind of where we would get to, I would have opened up my world a little sooner.
Okay. So are you talking about opening up and sort of letting go of some of the stress of that change?
Yeah.
Because, coming out of graduate school, this is what I worked on.
Mm-hmm.
I know about this.
Exactly.
So, so learning to expand yourself a little bit outside of that.
Yeah, so I think the stress of the change is one thing that maybe I could have done better. But also just realizing that I needed to have my blinders off about even what the definition of us, if that makes sense. I had defined what the company was too narrowly, and it took me a while to absorb a bigger definition of us.
Okay.
And I think I could have done that with more forward thinking if I had kind of had those blinders off to begin with.
Okay. So what's the one thing you wouldn't change?
I wouldn't change joining. I mean, you told me I couldn't change that anyway, but I wouldn't, even if I could. And I also wouldn't change the way that I have thought about myself as an employee.
Okay.
So I really don't think of myself as employee number one.
Right.
I've made the intentional choice to think of myself as a late-stage founder, and I think that has been a really good choice for me. Okay. So, in that kind of back and forth between owning your role and then feeling disempowered and,
right.
Do I have an effect here or not? It's been really good for me to just
So
realize
in my
value.
experience, you're sort of going through what founders do after they sell their company.
Uh-huh.
But you're doing it all the time, like a ping pong ball. Because, founders' companies are their baby, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they sell it, and if they stay on,
Mm-hmm.
they no longer have
Mm-hmm.
total control of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so you've always been sort of, let's say, super responsible and own it,
Mm-hmm.
but then have it pulled back occasionally because of all these big changes that have gone through.
Right.
So, what would you tell the founders,
Mm-hmm.
when they eventually sell this company, how to handle that?
Oh, man. So, yeah, I really don't think they know how it's going to feel. It's funny because I've had that conversation with some of them directly, that,
Mm-hmm.
the loss that I've experienced when my role has contracted
Mm-hmm.
has been really, it took me by surprise, and trying to describe that loss to them, they just have this look on their faces like, not computing,
It's hard, too.
Yeah. So when that does happen, and when they do have to eventually really get through that moment of loss, I think I would just, tell them that no one can take away what they've, the experiences they've had and what they've learned. And so I think that's, you might feel like you're losing your baby, but you're not. You're carrying forward everything it was that you learned, and having a startup.
So to sort of wrap this up, now that you've been a late-stage owner, or founder, slash first employee,
Yep.
slash parent with kid going to college and new kid coming along. Would you do this again?
Yeah. You know, do you mean would I do it with a new company?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would. I mean, it's hard to describe. There's some part about it that is so addictive in a weird way, like that feeling of creation and being on the cusp and every day being something new. That I would definitely.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I look forward to talking with you in the future, and thank you everybody for joining us.
Thanks.